It's all part of the experience wearing the headphones.
Nice. Oh my God, this
Yeah.
is ASMR.
Cloudy.
Yeah. Tom. Oh, this is so fun. Also, I don't hear all that well, so this is really, really wonderful.
Oh, good. Okay. Shall we begin?
Yes.
I'll do a bit of a formal beginning. Well, you've seen the podcast, so it's not
Yes.
that formal.
Ting, 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 ting. Off to a good start.
Cloudy. Cloudy Upton Kamp as you sip on your iced coffee.
Yes.
How are you doing?
I'm well, thanks.
Good.
You?
Yeah,
Thanks
yeah,
for
great.
inviting me. This is so fun. I'm really pleased, like how this came about, and it was just so serendipitous. You spoke to Benji, and you were like, "Oh yeah, let's do,"
Yeah, that's right. Benji is one of your students. We should probably
Yeah.
clarify that.
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah. Great student, by the way, as
Oh,
well.
he's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, where should we begin? Should we begin at the start?
Wow.
No, let's talk about what you've done recently, because that's like big headline news, isn't it, really?
With the library stuff.
Yeah.
I always when you say that line, let's start at the very beginning. You didn't say it like that, but immediately Sound of Music is in my head, which is one of my. It's actually the first film I ever saw in the cinema, so it's always Sound of Music is a big theme in.
Oh,
my
nice.
life.
So it is kind of the beginning for you in a sense.
Yes.
That film.
Oh God, yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen it. Am I allowed to say that?
Yes, of course. I think I can dream it forwards, backwards. Yeah. No, I think I could probably say big chunks of dialogue from the film. Yeah.
Go on then.
No,
No, I'm joking. So you are credited as having discovered, is it fair to say discovered, the first ever copyrighted motion picture?
Yeah, I would actually use the word identify,
Okay.
because I think that's a crucial difference,
Mm.
and that immediately goes to the heart of everything that I'm interested in researching, because it says something about archives, right? So I like to think of archives as places where things are being stored, but discovering has this ring to it, as if, well, maybe we didn't know where it was. But you see how immediately this becomes very complicated? Because discovering something says much more about where we are in our lives, looking at these historic documents, as opposed to how they ended up there, how they are being disseminated. Do you see what I mean? So discovering is a word which is to me problematic and Indiana Jonesy, and you know. So identifying by triangulating all sorts of other information, that's I think what I did.
So you think the word discovering is more for something that's genuinely been lost, whereas this, I think, something in an archive you probably could argue was never really lost. It was just not talked about for a while, maybe, or something like that.
Yes, but we also have so much stuff. So if you know the particular institution we're talking about, the Library of Congress, is the largest library in the world. 175 million items in their collection. Every day it grows with 20,000 more. It is really unfathomable, like how much stuff that is. But of course, it's also not everything that was ever made, right? Because that's an unlivable world. So this process of how does it end up there, and you know, there's so many layers to what we keep and what purpose and why and how, and so yeah.
So the library is documents, or is it also physical things?
Yeah, it's everything. It's both physical and now, you know, increasingly more digital, of course. But it's also, and I don't know if you know that, but originally the U.S. Copyright Office and the Library of Congress, they're, well, one and the same institution. So materials come into the library because of copyright deposit, which is a system that is unique to the U.S. And so there is all these layers of complication when you think about you know, things coming into the library because of copyright deposit, it's maybe not necessarily something that you would want to collect, but you have to collect because they become federal documents. Because
Okay.
that is the actual location where you deposit the materials.
What can you think of an example of what you mean when something you don't want to collect but you have to collect? What do you mean by that?
Well, say, I mean, a library is different in that sense than an archive, for instance, because, say, a film archive. So I used to work at the Netherlands Film Museum. Um, I think maybe, and I definitely did so as well, maybe people think like, oh, the National Film Archive of the Netherlands certainly keeps everything that has ever been made, and that's just, you know, philosophically that's not even possible, but it's also in practice not the case. It is a highly curated collection, right? So certain things you do choose to keep and others you do not. Whereas, right, that's more like a museum collection. Whereas the Library of Congress, because of that copyright stipulation, you just keep, right? You take everything in that
Things
is
that are not
deposited.
necessarily of public interest is what you're saying,
Yeah,
or
or museal interest,
mm,
or you
okay.
know, whatever. So if we do talk about that first motion picture, I mean, that was deposited as very much a targeted, right? It's a way of trying to own it. It's not necessarily, oh, I want this to be part of the Library of Congress. I want this to be part of the film archive that they're going to have found in the 40s. So it is kept for different reasons.
Can you explain what the first film was? The first.
Well, the thing is, I mean, I'm expanding the project, and hopefully it's gonna become a book. In, you know, as I'm thinking through some of these issues, but all of those words that you just said, I would put in quotation marks, because what is the first film, right? So I think depending on how you would define any of those words, what is a film, right? What is the first? So it kind of depends on how you demarcate, right, and how you define it. So in this case, it is only retrospectively that we have decided this is where motion pictures start for the Copyright Office, right?
Yeah.
Because moving pictures existed for several years already then, and it's still very, very difficult to say what is the first. There are some highlights on the way to still photographs becoming motion pictures, but in this case we have retrospectively decided this is the first one. So um
And it's a paper print, right?
yes. So actually, yeah, my own chapter in the book. This is sort of how I started that research. I've always known. So my background is in film restoration, and through work, I would often visit the silent film festival in northern Italy, and I remember even in the early 2000s that you know, I was very new into that world, and everybody would be in this beautiful cinema, but people would walk out, and there was one bar where everybody would sit and hang out, and you would always hear people coming out of the cinema going like, "Oh, that must have been a paper print. That looked so grey," and I kind of, you know, the comments sort of lodged themselves in your head, and I maybe at the time I didn't necessarily know what that meant. And then as I started knowing more about them, I kind of only knew them as the motion pictures that they were, but also later, which is my main interest, the reuse of existing material. So the avant-garde filmmakers that then started reusing these paper prints, those early 20 years of American cinema. And then via a different route, I sort of became interested in copyright. And then the two sort of merged
Nice.
because these films right, survive because of the idea that they were deposited for copyright. And once I started thinking about them in terms of, well, legal documents, that becomes this, I don't know, it just opened up this whole fascinating world of like now everything that I'm interested in is together in this one object. And I studied photography as well, so they're technically photographs, but they're also motion pictures, but they're these legal documents, and then later they become reused by these avant-garde filmmakers. And I have a huge interest in found footage filmmaking, so I was like, I have to research
It all
this.
merged together nicely.
Yes.
What is a paper print, and what's the opposite, if you like? Not opposite, that's the wrong word, but what's different from a paper print to, say, shooting on film or whatever? Is that the, can you explain what paper print is?
Yes. So actually, I mean, there are some images. Actually, the one on the cover there in the pink, yeah. So that's
For those watching on YouTube,
that's actually what you see there is a roll of film, as we might still know it from the analog era. But what you see there is not a roll of celluloid, but it's paper. So it's opaque. You can't see through it, and it is a print from the negative, in order to then store that at the Library of Congress, deposit it for copyright so that your film is registered. But because the film was shot on nitrate, also you wouldn't send a negative, right, a valuable camera negative to the Library of Congress. But even imagine that would be a positive. You wouldn't send that because the nitrate was inflammable, and so the library didn't have any facilities, of course, to store that. So they thought of this ingenious way of depositing it like that. However, these beautiful rolls, and they vary in size because films over time become longer. The very first, well, the 5 that I study, which is kind of nuts, right? That out of all these 20 years, I just look at the first 5, which only comprised like a year and a half. But there was sort of a transitional period from, say, 1893 to 1912. In 1912, the law changed in the US, so beforehand, motion pictures could not be registered in their own category. Motion pictures as a copyright category didn't exist yet. That is exactly why they were deposited as long strips of consecutive photographs. They were registered as photographs. And so you see this transitional period where lots of producers and filmmakers, they interpreted the law themselves, and you see all these experiments. Some people would send in 2 images of every scene in a film. Some people send in 1 enlarged frame of every scene. There's lots of different ways, and it's beautiful to see, because that's actually where you see that motion pictures start to emerge, right? They start thinking about, is it an extension of what already existed, photography, or is this something new? And those 20 years or so are that a transitional period. And those first, so paper print actually is a print on paper. I mean, it's as straightforward as that. It can take that form in a film roll, but those very first 5, they are, and there's an image in the book. It's one flat photograph, but the photograph consists of multiple other photographs, if all the frames of the film, if you wish. But they have been carefully re-photographed, because you actually have to do something to the film strip, maybe cut it. We don't necessarily know how the negative became this paper print.
It's something I think probably we take for granted these days with the digitization of everything, how easy it would be just to lay things out on a page like that. Yes. But to try and imagine how they did that and not destroy the film.
That's exactly right. But also, the steps that are involved to get from this to that that's actually what I'm looking at now, and where the idea for that might have come from. And it's fascinating because there are so many steps involved in re-photographing, because I've been fortunate enough to see the two deposits. So you had to deposit everything in two best edition copies. It wasn't just one copy. You had to deposit everything twice. And I've been fortunate enough to see the two sneezes, as they're called. That was what we, until now, thought was, well, we didn't think it was the first that was registered, but it was the first one that survived, which technically is the second one. And I've been fortunate enough to see them next to each other, and it's astonishing because you just see one layer of emulsion. It's not, right? I mean, it has been re-photographed several times in order to end up at this one thing that got deposited. And yeah, I'm just really fascinated by that level of tinkering, and they were changing, you know.
And the is it fair to say foresight at that point in time to understand how important it was to do this, or did they already get a sense that things needed to be copyrighted at that early stage?
What do you mean they needed?
I mean, presumably before the first motion picture was copyrighted, there were motion pictures produced or artifacts of some description before copyright was a thing at all, that people just created and had no idea that the importance of copyright and intellectual property.
Yeah, absolutely.
So do you feel like that was foresight at that time to be able to see that, or was it an emerging problem that needed to be resolved?
Yeah, this is $1 million question.
Right.
Now, there's so much still to discover about. I mean, if only I could fly back in time and sit down with W.K.L. Dixon and go, like, tell me everything. I mean, can you imagine? Now, so...
I liked, on that note, by the way, I liked the way, the style of your contribution to this book.
The chapter.
It was, written to...
to Ainsworth Rance Bufford,
right. Who was who was the
Librarian of Congress?
Okay, thank you.
And
I don't want to get my technicalities
muddled. He was also the head of the Copyright Office. Wasn't founded yet. That took another 4 years. But he was the head of copyright, and it's fascinating. He wasn't a lawyer, and he was determined.
He sort of fell into that role a bit, right?
No, I mean he kind of created it.
Oh, okay.
Because he's the person who's responsible for bringing copyright to the Library of Congress. So before that happened, he's been there for, he in total works there for 47 years. So the stamp that he puts on that institution is incredible. But what happened before is that if you are an author and you would deposit your 2 books with your local district court, which no matter where you lived, right, in the US, and eventually that had to make its way to DC, which of course it often didn't. And so he thought of this genius way of centralizing that, because he in turn didn't have a lot of money to make the collection grow. So what he did was, why don't we have people send those 2 copies to Washington directly? You sort of circumvent that extra step that also is it puts a brake on that development of having the stuff come to
in
Washington.
Terms of not having to seek things yourself. Is that what you mean? Or
well, also I don't know exactly how it worked, but I assume all the district courts were responsible for then sending it on to Washington, which we have the information that it didn't, or it didn't always. And what am I trying to say? So what he did, he centralized it in DC. So you would send your 2 books to the Library of Congress immediately. One would be for the deposit of the copyright, and the other one would be to grow the collection. And so that was the genius.
I was wondering why you had to send 2. Right.
Yeah,
yeah, that's the reason.
The reason was also you had to send 2 best edition copies. I think maybe one didn't prove enough. It's a very good question. I don't know why. Because now, actually, only 4 or 5 years ago, the law changed that it's now 1 again.
Perhaps this is because maybe you might have stolen from someone 1, but it's unlikely you'd steal 2 or something.
Maybe. I mean, I'm sure that there's there might be a very practical answer to that.
Yeah.
But he thought of that right, genius intervention. And then that's still the underpinning of the Library of Congress now, 130 years later. Sorry, but we came from a different direction. Like, why, you said, did they have the foresight, and were they doing that? This is, like I said, the $1 million question, because what I'm looking at right now is this parallel story between Muybridge, who worked for Stanford, and Dixon, who worked for Edison, and they're doing sort of similar things on either side of this breaking point, as I sort of say it, or that's how I see it. These two are right before it, and these two are right after it, around this breaking point of when we see the emergence of motion pictures. But there's a really interesting thing once you delve into their stories. These guys were really well versed in patent law, because that's what they were doing. They were registering their machines, they were inventing lots of things. But there are different rules involved when it comes to patent as when it comes to copyright. So we have some sort of indications that maybe they were thinking that the film strips that were coming out of the machine could be protected under the patent of the machine, as sort of a right, as a consequence of the technology.
A proof that the machine works in this manner or something. That kind of
whatever they were thinking. Maybe it was, yeah, indeed, a proof of the machinery, rather than maybe a creative work in itself. So there is some indication that they were thinking along those lines, but it also has to do with attribution for who does what. Because in patent law, so say Stanford and Muybridge, for instance, although Stanford was the patron, he paid for everything. He, as a company, could not have taken out the patent. The patent always has to be in the name of the inventor. So in this case, it's in the name of Muybridge, right? This setup. Can I keep?
You can move it away if you need to. It's fine. I think I might adjust mine slightly. Actually,
just like gesticulate.
It's usually me kicking the foot of one of them, but I've changed how they're set up this time around. Anyway, sorry, we digress.
No. But in copyright, it doesn't work like that, right? So what we see is some confusion around who owns what and who gets credit for what. And this is very much, I think, of our interest in the time in which we're living, sort of revising some of these historical narratives, and not necessarily righting the wrongs, because I think you just talk yourself into a difficult corner when you look at history like that. But it is obviously more complex. The story of invention and innovation is so complex. It's not just one person who does something, right? Times are ripe with ideas, and they pop up in different in different places at the same time. So what you see around that time is a sort of thinking that is slightly maybe confused with the thinking around patent, or at least that's what I'm trying to figure out right now. But at the same time, you see that Dixon particularly, but also Muybridge, they are registering their work for copyright with the Library of Congress. So Dixon has been doing that for several years with his still photographs, because he's the main photographer at the Edison plant.
Right.
And he's registering things that in a way he should not be registering. So if we were to do that today, you couldn't register that. You wouldn't be considered the author. So for instance, he registers a photograph of Edison as a 13-year-old boy. Now if you think through that, Dixon has not taken that photograph. That was impossible. But it also wasn't taken by Edison either. We might not even know who took it. But Edison let Dixon register that photograph in his name. Now that wouldn't happen now.
That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, so they're trying to figure this out.
Mm.
But what's wonderful is that Dixon is asking all these questions of Spofford, right? Spofford sets the policy and he's writing him all these questions. And I've been able to look at all these letters. And it's really, really fascinating to see that conversation, you know, play out. There's like a portrait of Edison's mother, which none of them owned, but Dixon is registering that in his name. There's a $40 bill with, no, actually that's different, because a $40 bill, I don't know how, if they were rare at the time, but Edison has signed it and then he copyrights that, right? It's just, they're trying to copyright.
It's like they're probing the system to see how it's going to end up or something.
For sure. And Edison, I think.
This is the Thomas Edison, by the way, isn't it?
Yes. Thomas Edison. Yes, Thomas Alva Edison. So, what was I trying to say?
That was a nicely timed sound effect.
Yes. Very good. I'm going to do that too. No, I think they're trying to copyright so many things, and actually, this was really wonderful when I was at the library, because the manuscript division has this. I sort of call it a mini collection of 30 odd boxes of what we now consider to be. The unfinished business of the Copyright Office. So imagine that if you are trying to register something and it gets rejected for whatever reason, then it gets sent back to you. And so there is no record of the stuff that didn't get registered. And that's really, really difficult as an insight when you're trying to look at this history. So these boxes are full of stuff that didn't make it through, or at least.
How have they collated these boxes then? Have they just asked for people to bring stuff in, or things have been?
No, at the time, right? So this is just stuff that sort of sat. Like, this is too complicated for now.
Oh,
we don't
and just
know what
sort
to
of
do.
left it to one side. It's almost the to-do list that never got round to.
Absolutely, it's a really good way of looking at it. And the boxes also look like that. It's just sort of haphazardly put together. Don't forget that there are multiple moves involved. So some of the boxes might not entirely be the year that they say they are. They're off by a couple of years. So then, as a researcher, I go completely mental. Because I was like, if I find an 1897 letter in the 1893 box, that must mean I have to go through everything, because the one thing that I will be looking for is going to be, in a
different. Oh no!
So I love systems. I love archives. I love when they work. But these boxes were wonderful, because you see all these questions that people are asking. Like, there must have been a copyright craze. You think of a game. Games are in there. Like, it's the overwhelming majority.
What sort of games? Board games, you mean, or like sports, or
board games, but also sports, cards, or anything, puzzles, and people trying to copyright it, like left and right.
So word got out, and obviously, I suppose people realised the importance of this, and that it could.
Yeah. Or maybe,
help them.
I guess, make some money. There are things in there, like the funniest thing I've seen is someone trying to register the letters of the alphabet, but made in apple cores. Like, actually bitten out of apples. They drew them, and it's the letters of the alphabet in apple cores, and you're like, what am I looking at?
Did they send the apple cores into the?
No, they were
library?
images. Because there's also that flattening, right? So sometimes they send the actual things. There are pins attached. There are.
So is it, in a sense, once it's a photo though, is it then a piece of art? The letters of the alphabet as apple cores.
Oh,
are they copyrighting the work of art as opposed to the?
Yeah, that's a very good question. No, in this case, that wasn't the case. But
really?
That's sometimes the case too, right?
Yeah.
And
it's complex, isn't it?
Oh, it's so complex. And some categories of work would never get registered as their actual category, right? Paintings wouldn't necessarily be sent in two copies as a painting, because if there's only one, then they would send photographs of them. So
Right.
there's that level of complication as well.
How long did you spend in this place? What is it? The Library
Library of Congress.
of Congress.
So
How
I was
long?
there for 7 months.
7 months. Working every day, going through.
Around the clock. I just
Really?
became obsessed.
Wow. Did you did you find yourself changing as a person during that period?
Well,
Did you lose touch with friends and family? We said before we came in this was going to be a therapy session.
Yes, exactly. You know what was, I mean, it was wonderful to be there. I mean, the Kluge Center is just incredible because you're surrounded by people who are really invested in.
Do you have to get special
research.
permissions to go in there? I assume you do.
No, the Kluge Center is the center that gives you the award, right?
Oh,
So,
sorry, okay.
yeah, I mean, once they vet you and they fingerprint you, you know, there's a lot of hoops before you
Really?
get to go. But then when you're there, it's like this amazing oasis. Everybody has their cubicles and you're all working there. But almost everybody is in the same boat. Nobody brings partners, families, you know, and so you're there for the research, but you also have each other. And there's always someone who's up for, you know, doing anything. So socially, it's also really rich. And then you talk about research all the time, and it's really amazing to be, surrounded by people who are as invested in their topics as you are in yours, which is really fascinating because I've learned so many things about, you know, other people's projects. And it's like,
Have you made contacts? Have you made contacts from that you stay in touch with?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, we had sort of like an English contingency, although we're not all English, but it was definitely the UK had its own
Like a historian's playground in there.
Yeah.
Would you describe yourself as a historian? How would you describe yourself?
Ooh, very good question. I don't like labels.
No, me neither.
As soon as I put a label on myself, I want to break out. Whatever the label is. No, seriously, I mean that.
What would
See,
you?
this
what,
is becoming a
what,
therapy session.
what would you? What would you type on a bio on a
Ooh.
LinkedIn bio or something?
I think maybe I would say
You could tell me what you're not. Let's do that. Let's play that game.
what I'm not.
Yeah,
Wow.
because I've often thought that. What am I not? And that sort of helps you define what you are. Because there's got to be things you're not.
Yeah, there's lots of things that I'm not, but I don't know if
That
they're
could be a long
relevant
game.
to this. Yeah, exactly.
Could be a boring podcast.
No, I think I would say film scholar.
Oh, nice. That's a nice title. Yeah.
Because it sort of encompasses, because I also dabble a little bit in making things or editing, and it's just like, I think I didn't even realize when I came here, because we are called a BA in film, we're not film studies, we're not film production, and I actually feel like that is, I mean, it is truly my course. I wish I, could have done it when I made that choice, because I venture in and out of that theory versus practice, but also analog, digital, all of it, and both historically but also contemporary, and I have now found these wider topics like intellectual property or copyright specifically, and the archive, and all of those things are both historically interesting to me, but also it has to be about now, right? History is about the now, at least it is to me. I'm not interested in retelling a story for its historical accuracy. It is about what does it mean now to look at a story again. And this is what you said, right? Have you changed? The biggest realization came, and it was actually in a conversation I had with James Fair when I was there.
Who's a colleague of ours here?
Yes.
On the film course?
Yes. And who wrote the film course, right?
Yeah, sorry, Jay.
No, I mean
Left that bit out.
that's very, very important. No, but I mean it has his fingerprints all over it. At least that's what I think. But it was in a conversation with him that I realized, and I think he said something to that effect, where you have this archive and all this stuff is being kept there, but you are also going about your daily life like looking at this stuff, and that's sort of a parallel, and that was something that I couldn't shake then anymore, because I was like, yeah, this is actually about me leading my life here on a daily basis, but looking at the life of someone else, their daily life, 130 years ago.
So
And
not trying to extract yourself from that process, basically.
Yes, exactly.
Being aware that you are part of that process.
Exactly, and that's, I mean, it of course comes from what you said, the structure of the chapter, but then the film I ended up making about the research has that structure as well. I address Ainsworth Rand Spofford because that allowed me to juxtapose that that past with my present, but also, you know, look at things how they are different. And actually this links to the photograph I have there.
Ooh, the secret surprise photograph.
No, but it's such a, for me it's a very creative and a useful way of looking at what is the same, what is different, how would you explain that to someone, how would I explain certain things how would I explain this? Right? It's and it's for me it's a very useful way of looking at the past. It can only be through the present.
And as you say, I suppose it helps you to be empathetic towards your own audience that you're now writing for in the 21st century.
And my students.
And your students, yeah.
I mean, my students are, and this is also, I mean, I've said this before, this is also why I ended up making the film, because when I was in DC, I had a really great Zoom conversation with Will, one of my other students, who was nominated for a prize at the time at Learning on Screen, and they had asked us to record like a thank you speech in case he should win. And so we were talking on Zoom, and he asked me about the research, and I was like showing him pictures and stuff, but it was a mutoscope reel, and a mutoscope reel is I mean, it looks like a spaceship out of a sci-fi movie, but it's basically a core with hundreds, maybe even thousands pictures around it. It's like a flip book.
Oh, well, one of the things that you spin and look through, and it.
Well, actually, it goes into the machine like that.
Oh,
and
I see.
You look into the mutoscope, which is sort of like a kinetoscope as well, and you would put in a coin, and you would right, and then you would see the. I think maybe you could even vary the speed, but you would see like Pope Leo is a very famous one, right? And then you were for 20 seconds you would see this move. And this is one of the brightest students, and he was like, oh, what is that? And it's not to say like, oh, you should know what this is, but I was like, oh, visually this is so interesting. I need to show it to them, because there is no point in me describing a mutoscope reel. Within 2 seconds, if you see it, you're like, oh, that. Because if I ask them, what is the oldest audiovisual technology that you have ever seen?
VHS, possibly?
You know what the answer was? One student a couple of years ago goes, oh yeah, I remember in middle school or whatever it's called here, they wheeled in this cart with this old VHS machine, and I'm like, and so I was like, oh wow, how am I gonna explain to them that for years I worked with nitrate, and you know, we restored this, and I was like, I'm gonna have to show it to them. And so that was really fun to do, to think of what it would mean to them and what would it mean today.
Let's talk about that film a little bit, shall we? The Shadow Line.
Yes.
I made a note, actually, because as I said before we came on, I've been experimenting with how I conduct these conversations, and I don't always have notes, but I thought I would try today.
Yeah.
There was... Oh, I wanted to firstly say your narration throughout is like beautifully written and delivered.
Thank
I thought
you.
it was just so mesmerisingly
Thank you.
delivered.
That's
It was
wonderful.
lovely. It was really nice.
It's funny, the other week when we showed it during the event, people didn't realize it was me. Also, I think because I mean, I feel very comfortable in English, but I'm still sort of, I take on the English of the people that I'm surrounded with. So because I was in the US for 6 or 7 months, my accent did change a little bit. And so I think that's what...
I think we all do that, to be honest, even
Yeah.
even if you're
Oh,
native.
really? If you're
yeah.
But also, you know what? I mean, now I'm, I feel this is animated and stuff, but I did record this sort of, I was by myself, I have shaved the text for a long time, and then I tried to record it as calmly as I could.
And again, it was delivered in the same style as your essay is in this book.
Yeah, that's where it came from. For a while, I didn't think that was what it was going to be like, but then I was like, it's actually when I saw The Eyes of Orson Welles, Mark Cousins documentary, where he does that. He addresses Orson Welles, and I was like, this is it. This is it. This is so. I mean, it's a very creative way of writing. I have never enjoyed writing as much as I did that script.
No, really.
Yeah, because usually when I do something creative, like I designed the book, I mean, I don't even need coffee. I get up and go like, I want to start. I never have that with writing. Like, writing is hard. And, sometimes even a physical aversion of sitting down, I think, all academics would recognize that. And this creative way of writing it felt like editing, it felt like working with pictures. It was so... Like, it was a joy to do.
So addressing somebody directly, as if you're writing them a letter, just helps you to flow. Yeah, it feels more like a conversation, perhaps.
I don't know what exactly it is. Maybe it is. I do like writing in the second form, which is...
is that what it's called? I'll take your word for that.
Well, is that...
Yeah, I don't know.
No, but what do you say the third...
I always get confused. It's first person, third person...
Yeah, second person. So, yeah, because it's the you. And it's hardly ever... Well, you don't necessarily write like that unless you write a letter. But I really, really enjoy writing in that voice. So now I'm going to have to make a decision, like, if this becomes a book, because I'm still trying to figure that out. Can I keep this up? Can I do it again?
For a whole book?
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Maybe you drifted in and out of it.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe you have chapters that are letters.
This is what you said earlier, and I do really want to come back to that, because I do really believe in the researcher putting themselves into the story, because I only have this one reality. And, the fact that I don't think there is... Oh my God, now we've drifted into a whole other
Go on, I'm excited for what you're going to say.
I don't think there is any objectivity, right? I mean, I can only see the world experience through my current reality and all these intersectional things that... So...
I think certain fields of research are more open to that idea of there not being an objective truth than others. I think probably the hard sciences and things... Well, I don't know. I don't want to speak on behalf of them, but it feels like...
Yeah, but you know what? Facts and reality and truth are not necessarily the same things, right? I do believe in some of these things, but maybe less so or the co-construction of me and my own reality is very different from...
I mean, you have to believe in a certain level of fact just to live a normal life. Otherwise, you'd probably be locked up in a mental asylum if you lived your life going around.
For sure, but
none of this is real.
Right, but I don't think that those are necessarily the same things.
Okay.
And I think that's how I experienced my undergraduate. We were just handed a book called Film History, and I think it was presented in my memory as this is what happened. It was... waves and directors, almost all of them white and male. And this is what you were told. This is what happened. And then I think what I've become interested in over time is actually, how was that book compiled? How can we look at those stories again? Because they are more complicated than the way that it was presented.
So the story of how the book was compiled is actually more interesting than the book itself, perhaps.
Absolutely. I think if I would, put
and why things were omitted as well, that sort of thing. Yes. Yeah.
So I'm way more interested in the historiography of the story than the actual history. No, but this is exactly why I looked at that first motion pictures. This is really what happened when I got there. So I had always had the hope that the needle in the haystack part of that story would be like a nice secondary, effect. It was never the main story, but the main story was always like, how have we told this history? And the history of telling that history, that is a really fascinating thing to look at, because that is punctuated by, right, the historical interest over time, and how that has changed. So the historiography is what I look at.
Do you think we've improved the way we tell stories about ourselves these days, in terms of that being more equal and being more representative of what's of the people involved and things? Do you think we're better at that now than we were back then? You said it's predominantly white men. Are we getting better at that?
Well,
that's a big sigh.
I know. Well, if you compare today with, October 6, 1893, then yes, but
progress is slow.
Yeah. Are we there? No, I think we will never be there, right? Because this is why an archive is so fascinating, because you look at, these are the voices that were kept. These are the voices that are allowed to be heard. And that's, I actually think that through those archival presences, you see the archival absences. That to me is really fascinating.
I remember my mum had a book when I was younger. I remember seeing the cover of it lots, that said history, and on the other side of the book said her story.
Right. Yeah.
And then inside it was all these comical little things.
Yeah.
What the man thinks happened, and then what the woman's telling of the real thing. It was a comical kind of comic strip sort of style. Yeah. But I always remember that, and I just reflected on that a lot.
And the power of those words, right? Not even realizing that that's how the word is.
Is that the actual origin of the word? His story?
Who knows? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised. It's probably some Latin origin.
Yeah.
I don't know.
We'll have to look that up now.
Yes.
We'll Google it later.
Yes.
So what led you to this point? Talk a bit about your maybe, growing up, first of all, your childhood. What led you to become the person you are now and to be interested in this particular field of research?
This is therapy.
We're going to go right back there,
yeah. It's funny because the book of my PhD, in the preface, I sort of go into that a little bit. I think what I remember is that I was glued to the television, like stories, visual stories. I also read a lot. Like, I loved the library, I loved school, but I loved the television. Like, there was a world out there.
Like every kid, right? Nearly.
Yeah, but you know what? No, I know quite a few people who didn't have that as obsessively as I had. I think it was escapism, and I think it was a sign of a world out there where magical things were happening. This is way, pre-internet. So
what sort of stuff did you watch? Can you remember?
Everything. Like everything. Also, I grew up on the border of Holland, Belgium, Germany, so we had lots of, the foreign broadcasts as well, so everything.
Really?
Yeah, like German children's TV, everything.
Can you speak the languages as a consequence of that?
Yeah.
Really?
But also the fiction, non-fiction, it's like everything. Movies, the big Hollywood classics, maybe not so much the classic, but yeah, maybe feature films was like the big thing. But also TV shows, I was obsessed with this.
How young are we talking here when you became obsessed? Like 5, 6, older?
Maybe the awareness of the obsession is later, maybe 12, 13. There was a particular soap opera, that I was really invested in, and I would bike home from school to see like my favorite characters get married, because I'd figured out what day of the week that was going to happen. And,
Do you still watch soaps now?
No,
I can't stand soaps. I'm glad you said that.
No. I completely lost that. Good on everybody who still does. But I remember there was a Dutch TV show about a hospital that I became so obsessed with that, I wrote the stars. I like collected their pictures. It was and I wanted to become a surgeon my entire high school. This is a therapy session. I wanted to become a surgeon because my favorite character on the
Oh, so what
show,
went wrong, Claudy?
what went wrong? No, you know what? I realized there was a fascinating shift because it had been about the form of the story, the television.
Ah, so it
all
was a
along.
realization. Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, it
That's a
actually
nice,
was.
yeah.
Yeah, it was a really great shift where you go like it had nothing to do with the content of the hospital because now if I walk into a hospital, I like nearly faint. I can't stand the smells in there. If I see blood, you know what I mean. It's like man, I would have been the worst surgeon, but it was all along about
So it was storytelling.
Yeah.
Okay, so when did you start realizing that you wanted to work in film specifically as opposed to, I don't know, writing stories or something like
Yeah.
this?
Very, very early.
Yeah.
I mean, I just don't remember a time when I wasn't like consume so much of this stuff. Now, obviously, a lot more than back then. But this is what I highlight in the preface of the other book. It's the times that I went to the cinema when I was younger were so special. It wasn't on a weekly basis. I mean, I can count them on one, maybe two hands, my entire youth. And that's what makes them stand out. The experience of going to the cinema was just absolute magical to me. And so that, I mean, I didn't know that that's what you could study. No, but I mean, it was just so magical. Like, I don't think I wondered like how they were made. It was just like
I don't think you do you, when when
No.
you're younger, really?
no, but I
Take
also
it for
didn't.
granted.
Yeah, and I didn't think that was work,
Mm.
right? I mean, E.T. was the most magical thing I'd ever seen. So, but I didn't think about how that was made. I couldn't even understand how it made me feel, but that's what that was about, right? It was just absolute magic. I still think it's one of the greatest films ever made. It's so yeah. So I understood that was really really special to me very early on. But then, like I said, that wasn't necessarily something you studied. So in Holland we had this. It was called an almanac. It was like a book with really thin sort of a newspaper paper with all the courses that you could study at university and higher education in the entire country. And right, pre-internet. So you would get this book from, I'm assuming, the library or the school.
It sounds a bit like the Yellow Pages, the phone book
Yes,
used
exactly.
to have. Yeah,
That's exactly what it looked like. That really thin paper
Yeah.
is just had a different cover, and you could and I went through it page by page. What is it that you can study? And then there was the page, film and television studies, and I was like, that's it. But
Wow.
obviously that didn't go down very well in my home. So also at the time, what I should say is film and television studies was a so-called, we called it a het study, which meant the Dutch system as it was at the time, you needed to have a first year degree, which is called a propeduise, in something else. And for film and television, it was either a language, history, or sociology, or theater studies. And theater was probably even further from any sort of world of possibilities.
From any proper career.
Oh gosh,
Yeah.
no. I mean, but also I didn't necessarily have that interest at that time. But I had this real crisis going into the final year of my high school, which is when you sort of you've worked in within a certain kind of profile in order to go to university. So I'd gone the medical route, right? I was really into like science and all this stuff. And all of a sudden I wanted to change. I was like, I don't want to go to medical school. And so I started thinking back of what of these possibilities was I good at. And then I only once look, so in Holland we grade out of 10, and I only had like I had a 10 on my report card once, and that was for French. So I was like, I'll study French. And so that was decided. I think, my parents were on board, and there I went.
So it was French, and then film was the...
Yeah, so
what did you call it? The head?
Yeah, it was called Kop Studie, which means, the top up or whatever that's called.
I see, right.
I don't think it exists anymore. It didn't have its own first year degree, so that's how new it was. And it was, even in the news, it was sort of regarded as this thing that you laughed at, ha ha ha, film studies. And now, it's like one of the biggest... We understand that, studying the power of media has its, right?
Benefits?
Yeah, benefits.
What do you think of this idea that kids especially can have too much screen time then? If you presumably, well, I would say that you are a shining light of the opposite argument to that. If you said you were glued to the screen and you were obsessed with it when you were growing up, and look what it's become.
Yeah, well, but you know what? I once read this amazing article about someone having to go to a local diner to watch a show on a TV. This was a US article, and I wish I had prepared this. It was, I think, someone trying to come to terms with realizing that they were gay and they weren't allowed to watch this particular show at home. So they were going to the local diner where the show was on that had a gay character on it. And I think it was about this identification. And I thought that was so fascinating because the article spoke about the power of not seeing. And so I wonder if, of course, when I grew up, there was sort of a not watching TV was the penalty, right? It was, and there was also a limitation of screen time. It was like not right after school. That's when you need to do the homework. So I think we've always had versions of that. Some kids like to read so much that maybe their penalty is, not being allowed to read or.
Well, people often say, don't they, that when storybooks were first, I don't know when this was, but that they were kind of lauded as the same way that TV now is. It's like you mustn't read those books, kind of thing. Yeah. So it's just, but yeah, go on, carry on. In terms of screen time, do you think that?
I find it a really difficult conversation because, when I see it being used as a sort of soothing mechanism, recently on vacation, right, at a table next to us, but if the alternative is that kid is screaming at the table next to me, I'd rather that they would. And they're so obsessed, right? I mean, I'm looking at this kid being really obsessed with the little YouTube video.
It turns them into zombies, kids. Yeah, they're so transfixed on screens.
But at the same time, that's probably what I looked like when I watched The Sound of Music for the 25th
Absolutely.
time.
I mean, everyone gets... I mean, I don't know anyone who doesn't, when they watch a film that they love, become transfixed on it, hypnotised by it almost. I think maybe the argument is a little bit too basic, that there's too much screen time, unless we're talking specifically about damaging your eyesight or something. But I think screen time, just because of some other reason that it might affect your behaviour or something, or your personality or something like this, is probably a bit too basic, because surely it depends on the content you are watching. It's like saying, you're spending too much time living your life, because if you grew up around lots of crime and aggression, so I think it's more specific probably, isn't it? But even saying that, I mean, there's people go on about violence in games and things and affecting kids, but actually, I don't think there's actually much evidence of that either.
Right, exactly. No, I mean, lots of studies are being done, right? I actually don't have a black and white answer to that. I'm like, no, it's like, is it important for a child to discover its own creativity and maybe play outside and run about? Yes. But I think reading is virtuous. I mean, it's an incredible skill, but is watching a screen? I don't know. I don't want to rank it. But should it be limited? I think probably all things should be limited.
Yeah, my mum always used to say everything in moderation.
Yeah, well, I don't think I agree with that, but no,
I'll
but
tell her later.
No, but
Yeah.
in general, because it's a problematic argument once you speak about addiction or food choices, all of those things. Anyway, a whole other conversation.
What were your parents like then? You say they limited your screen time, and also that going into film was a bit contentious at the time.
I don't remember not ever being allowed not to watch anything, which actually is an amazing memory. I only remember once that I wasn't allowed to watch a film until its very end because it was late, but also I think maybe they were expecting guests or whatever, and that is also a very strong memory of not being able. So this is what I meant earlier with. You said, "Oh, look at what you've become," but part of the fascination is also because I remember it being limited, right? There wasn't as much. I mean, we didn't have 24 hours around the clock content, so you were trying to get what you could get. And one of my strongest memories is having to stay home at the time that something was broadcast, and that sometimes would lead to conflicts if you were scheduled to do other things. And so that is completely different now, right? So
Yeah.
I think the tension between being allowed, being not allowed, or being able to, being not able to, because it wasn't a matter of that you could put on content in any time of the day if you had woken up early or whatever. I mean, Saturday morning was like, cartoons. I don't really remember this all as well, but you know what I mean.
Absolutely, it's a massive culture shift, and
Yes.
it affects people in different ways. I always think about this. How parents say to kids, "Eat your dinner and then you can have dessert."
Yes.
You're basically saying dessert is the thing you want.
Yes.
Yeah, but you can't have.
That's so true.
Yeah,
Never
it's that.
thought of that.
I think that's often, what you can't have is the thing you most desire.
Absolutely.
And then you get it sometimes, and it's
Or the
not
having
what you
to
thought it
finish
was.
your plate. Yeah, exactly. And then you're like, I didn't want this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just like these primal sort of instincts of maybe jealousy and just desire for things, isn't it? Drives us sometimes.
Well, and but we all understand that desire for, being allowed to watch television was like the biggest thing, right?
I guess so, yeah.
But also, I remember
It was very frustrating when I was told no.
Oh,
I remember
my
being very
gosh.
frustrated as a kid a lot of the time when I wasn't allowed to do.
But also the way, didn't
Or
it
play
shape
games.
your image of the world? I mean, was partially shaped by what you saw on TV, right?
Yeah, I think massively, yeah.
Cultural references.
Yeah, I think that's probably, that effect has kind of exponentially grown now, so that, kids have this, especially maybe Western kids, let's say, will have a very similar culture because they all engage in the same things.
Right.
Although, having said that, the audience is also more fragmented, so perhaps they're not engaging in the same things.
Yeah.
Because, back when I was growing up, it was like everyone would watch the Saturday night entertainment show, whatever it was at the time. The Gladiators, for example, I used to watch.
Yeah.
And then everyone would talk about that, so that
Yes.
forms your culture. So
That's
I suppose...
exactly right. So Wednesday morning in my school was very much so the medical hospital show I talked about was broadcast on Tuesday evening.
Right.
Wednesday morning, the whole school was talking about it. That doesn't exist anymore
No.
at all.
No, not in the same way, but I think it probably still exists in microcosms, like
Sure.
Kids talking about the latest TikTok dance or whatever it is these days,
From 3 seconds ago, yeah.
Yeah, and then it's another one.
I know, yeah. And then, oh my God, yeah.
But
So what are your big cultural references when it comes to TV? Like big world-changing events that you've experienced through the TV?
Oh, well, world-changing events just made me remember the death of Princess Diana.
Right.
I was on holiday in Malta at the time, and that came up on the screens in the lobby area. And, that sort of a shell shock on our holiday kind of thing.
Yeah.
But, I don't know if that's what you're really asking, but
No,
I remember
those
that
are-
very
those are
vividly.
I don't associate that necessarily with the TV. I do remember the moment. I remember, where I was standing, who told me, and where we were living at the time. but really experiencing it through the TV, I think, was different.
But other than that, I think probably my predominant memories of TV, none of them really spring into mind. But I think maybe playing games more so through the TV was more.
Oh, really? I've never
for
done
me.
that.
I mean, it caused me more powerful emotions. Let's say.
Yes.
I used to play a lot of football games and things, and if you
What are those?
lose. Football console, computer game football.
Sorry,
Yeah, sorry.
not through live TV. I mean, you.
Yeah, no, just
the
a
TV
computer,
as
just
the
a console.
screen.
Yes,
That's
sorry,
it.
yeah, sorry.
You're
Yeah.
like, do I really
I'm inventing a
need
new
to explain
thing.
you what a game is?
I'm inventing a new medium here as
No,
you
but
talk.
you know what? I mean, I remember it was the most powerful thing. This must have been somewhere in the 90s. You could call into sort of a music channel and you could line
Request.
up
Your next song. Yeah, that was the.
I spent so much money on that.
That's how MTV started, wasn't it? Really like that, I think.
Yeah.
Or was that
I
just
think,
more a playlist that they played out? I
don't
know
know.
some of the channels were like that. I remember. Yeah.
I think, now I'm completely blanking on the name, but there were one or two where it's like, I was so obsessed with certain videos and I would just request it over and over again. I mean, Bush, Silence Is Not the Way is one of the most beautiful videos I had ever seen.
Kate
and I
Bush?
would just, no, Bush, the band of
I've not heard of them.
Gwen Stefani's husband.
Oh, okay.
A former husband.
Right.
Oh my God,
yeah, I
I'm
think I
like
know what you mean.
butchering all the... Anyway, I would just request it over and over again.
Mm.
That was so powerful that you could interact with the television. It was nuts. So I thought that's what you meant with football games.
No.
Are you old enough to have seen like the falling of the Berlin Wall and stuff like that?
No. What year was that? I think that might have been around.
89?
Oh yeah, so I was 3 then.
Yeah,
So no.
so you probably wouldn't
No.
weren't watching it. You weren't watching it.
But I think I can definitely remember some films, some iconic films like Indiana Jones when I was growing up was
Yeah,
a big
yeah,
one for me. That was like, and just coming out of the cinema and wanting to be Indiana Jones. The same with one of the Star Wars films. I'm not a massive Star Wars fan, to be honest, but when I went to see one of the... No, I've seen maybe a couple, but honestly, the acting is so stiff and wooden, I can't get on with it.
I mean, it's amazing how much I can shock our students by saying I've never seen them, and the longer I haven't seen them, the funnier it gets.
To be honest, I don't consider those kind of big studio blockbuster franchises required viewing for film students. To be
Right,
honest,
right.
I don't see them as. It's probably not fair to say they're not culturally significant, but they're not. They don't feel.
Just never happened. I don't even care that much about whether they are significant. It just has, never happened. You've seen other things. But what about, so is Indiana Jones the film that, sorry, I'm like interviewing you.
No, it's all right.
Is that the film where you go like, oh, that's what I want to be? Did you have more films like that? Like they instantly changed your life?
Oh, in terms of working in film?
Well,
no, to be honest, I
even...
I drifted my way through life until I was about 26. Honestly.
Don't we all? I have the feeling I'm still drifting.
It was only when I was working on building sites for 7 years after leaving sixth form college.
Wow.
So I was a chippy building roofs.
Wow.
And then my girlfriend, who's now my wife, kind of revealed to me that creativity was my biggest attribute.
That's amazing.
So then I started looking around and sort of got into media. So I don't have a massive...
So you went back to school later on?
Yeah, I did a year at college, an access degree, which is amazing that those things exist these days for people like me, because otherwise I would probably still be on building sites now, stuck and depressed and down on life, and it was really like that.
Oh my God, this is so funny you say that, because I think you're consistently one of the happiest people who work here. You're like always like this. No, seriously, you're always like...
Maybe that's the benefit of perspective.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I often think that, a lot of it is about perspective, isn't it? I often think someone who's come from poverty, who then comes to this country, for example, and gets a minimum wage job, is going to be over the moon.
Yeah.
Maybe they have a flat to live in,
Yeah.
and they lived in poverty in a different country or something previously.
Yeah.
So it's all just about perspective, isn't it? And someone who's born in this country and then drops down and lives in that state, exactly the same condition, but because they came from maybe a better position previously, now has the perspective that this is terrible and whatever.
Yeah.
I think it's all, yeah. Happiness is a lot to do with perspective in my mind.
I think that's the quote of the day. No, but it is though. It really, really is, because I have had jobs where if they had paid me 5 times more, I wouldn't have stayed, and vice versa. Jobs where maybe I didn't. Maybe like a student job that you thought content-wise was really interesting, but you wouldn't make enough. It's all about perspective. And now I cannot believe that this is my job.
I was going to ask that earlier. Like, do you find it amazing that you get paid to do the stuff you do? I mean, don't tell anyone. Shh.
No, but I still cannot understand that. I mean, I have the feeling that I learn for a living. Maybe that's a bit overcharged, but no. But
I mean, you do a lot more, presumably, on the film degree and stuff as well.
No, sure. I mean, there's lots of admin involved, but it's just like, I didn't realize how much I love teaching. I mean, it's such a mirror that they hold back up to you, where I have to find new and creative ways of making what I think is interesting, translate that into making it of interest to them. But at the same time, they hand me so much of stuff that I would never experience or gravitate towards myself. But also I don't know, it's just incredible.
I have a feeling that might be testament to your own style when it comes to teaching students as well, that you allow to be enriched and influenced by your students, because I don't think every teacher I ever encountered allows that open sort of dialogue. So I think that's probably testament to your own approach.
Oh, thanks for saying that. But I also wouldn't know how else to do it, because like I said, when we were handed the big Bible called film history, that was in a time where there was 200 people in a lecture theatre, and there's one omniscient narrator in the front, and they throw this monologue at you. There was no interaction, and those were, old style lectures, and that, I mean, it doesn't exist anymore. But it's also, I mean, it's way more fun to have a dialogue with these really interesting people.
Do you reflect on those experiences of the traditional lecture and think, do you ever think, that's what I don't want to do?
I didn't realize at the time, because I thought they were imparting me with knowledge I didn't have.
With knowledge, yeah. The only
exactly.
knowledge, yeah.
That's the real issue, for sure. So I was really interested in, watching all these strange movies that they made us watch, and there's virtue in that too, because I don't think I would have gravitated towards Dr. Kluge on a wooden bench in some lecture theater from a bad VHS. Probably that's how we saw them, right? German silent movie. So but I do have such vivid memories of that. So, but what I thought was interesting in evolving on from that is that I started questioning the stories and right, how they were told. So I think there's a little virtue in that, because I sometimes feel, I wish we could make the students, I don't believe in sort of, this is the canon and this is what you should have seen. They need to discover what they like themselves. But I do feel that sometimes we have the role of guiding them outside of their own little comfort zones, because, I'm very comfortable and familiar with silent film, and it takes the world for me to watch one at home on a laptop, right? So I cannot expect them to do that either and then see some of the magic of it. So I think sometimes you do have the role of guiding them into how amazing Buster Keaton can be, when you see it on the big screen, and with 7-year-olds present. That's when you really see Buster Keaton. Oh my God!
With 7-year-olds,
they understand everything, and
really?
And when you hear a 7-year-old laugh in a cinema,
the sort of
Keaton,
the body humor,
everything.
Yeah,
it's the storytelling. It's they get it, and then you realize, oh, we've taken this to a degree where we take it maybe a little too serious. But it's one of my magical memories of being at the Netherlands Film Museum, and they showed a restoration of the General, which I think is again, one of the greatest films ever made. But they were 7-year-old, however old they were. They were small children in the audience, and just hearing them laugh at that story, I was like, this is how that was meant.
Amazing. I remember, this just reminded me of I was on a ferry, I think in Italy somewhere. Well, not in Italy, on the waters, obviously. But Mr. Bean came on the ferry, and there were a mixture of different nationalities on this ferry.
Right.
But everyone was watching and laughing to Mr. Bean. So
exactly.
that just kind of made me realise how amazing that style of comedy can be, and everyone understands it. You don't need dialogue or words or anything. It's just everyone gets the storyline.
That is the power of silent cinema, right?
It's fantastic. I think we've covered off most of this stuff anyway, except for the book, really.
Oh, okay.
You need to just pull your mic around as well when you're ready.
Oh, yes. Hello.
Hello, welcome back.
Thanks, welcome back.
We were just saying off mic. Well, what were we saying? It's vanished from my mind.
Yeah, we were talking about legacy.
Oh, legacy, and remembering the first of something. Why people are so obsessed with the first of anything. Yeah. Go on. You sound like you were going to say something profound.
Well, no.
Put the pressure up now.
I've just been thinking about this quite a bit, because this is how we tend to look at history, right? The first of things, and
just to annoy you, I'm going to move your mic a little bit.
Yeah.
Oh, you can move this up. You can kind of move it around if you want.
Yeah.
Is that your way of your hands?
Is this okay? Also, I was sitting differently just now.
That's okay.
Hello.
It's not like film continuity. It's not.
That's
it's
true.
Okay.
That's true.
It'll be all right. I just wanted to make sure we're getting good audio.
Here. Yeah. Is it good now?
It sounds good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you've been thinking about why people are obsessed with the first thing.
Well, but look at how it comes into your own life, like all the time. It's about maybe one of your children winning a sports game in school. It's all of these things. Oh, but that's the first person who did this, and oh, what was the first close-up, and this was the first camera that did this. Or if you talk about games, oh, remember this first game in which
And you said you also uncovered the third paper print, but no one talks about that.
Yeah, so
everyone talks about the first.
Yeah, so I was looking at these 5, but it was at some point it became a deduction game, right? So out of the 5, we've always known 2, 4, and 5. 2 and 4 and 5 are identified, and of the 5th we don't have any deposit materials, but we do know what it is. And 1 and 3. No deposit materials, and we had no titles. But all of a sudden, when I saw the clue to the puzzle, so the clue to the puzzle was that I started checking Dixon's credits, and there was a huge distinction between what he said was photographed and copyrighted by him versus just photographed. Once I had that clue, I then could compare all the credits I could ever find. And then it became a deduction game. And then when I came across the letter with the fragment in it, and there was the biggest clue in which he said, this is the one that I just sent in. And so when I knew that that one was the first, I also then immediately knew what the third was. I don't think that what has it been? So actually Friday it will have been a year. So the 30th of June.
Oh really? Since you discovered? Okay.
So that
sorry, not discovered. No, identified.
No, actually I didn't identify it on that day because I was just so overwhelmed. So yeah, a year, and no one has asked me a question about that third.
Go on then, let's go for it.
So no, but it's
I think there's something distinct about the first of something. I think we like to have heroes as well, don't we? And you think of the person who did something first as somehow more of a genius or better than everybody else because they got there first. Do you know what I mean? It's
a competition type thing, isn't it? I completely understand what you mean. But in this case, there's so many buts, because it depends on the definition that we use, whether it was even the first. Right? It was the first deposit by Dixon while he worked for Edison for something that we
Yeah, but that's not a headline, Claudy.
No, that's what I mean. That's what I mean. Because,
Yeah.
What we want is sound bites.
Yes.
We want easy, clickable,
Exactly. Well, this is what podcasts are for, see?
Yes.
So you've now educated everybody.
Yeah, right. But I find it, but I also was thinking there needs to be more to this. And where I've landed now is there is no way that we can encompass or understand or embrace the entirety of history in all its richness. So by focusing on the first, which seems to be an identifiable point, is a way to reduce
the timeline.
Yeah,
and
the information that we retain.
That's a really good point.
Because the funny thing is, even I was thinking, how could I put this more poetically when I was writing the script? And there was a time that I was thinking, people would ask you like, do you remember your first kiss?
Yeah,
of course you do. Do you remember the third?
Yeah. It was probably with the same girl.
Well, no, but it might be. But
maybe.
You go like, I would have to think.
Yeah,
right?
because the first is special because it represents 100% of the experiences of that thing for you, isn't
That's
it? At
a
that point.
beautiful way of saying it.
I often think, because I've heard this idea that how life seems to speed up as you get older.
Yes, and it does, right?
because when you're 1 day old,
yeah,
1 day is 100% of your lived
100%,
experience.
yes.
Yeah, so that's a long time.
And when you go from 99
it's that perspective
to 100,
thing again.
It's 1%. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, no, less than 1 because it's 1 day, isn't it? But the year is then 1%. Yeah, exactly. So it's maybe a similar thing. It's like,
but it's also a way of comprehending what has happened. Also, it's way more difficult to go like, what was the third of something, or whatever.
Yeah, and when would you stop as well?
Yeah, exactly.
What was the 63rd? Yeah, no one cares.
That's the thing. We have learned not to care, and I think maybe historians are also in the market of. So I once read, which was so funny to me because it stuck with me ever since, that if you do historic work, you're either a splitter or a lumper, which I kind of like as a description. And so it means you either delve into something so deeply that you split out, like, oh, it's important what you ate this morning because that meant that this afternoon this and that happened, and then you changed the world. And lumpers are invested in, I'm going to look at your entire lifetime and what happened in the span of that
and condense it into a lump.
Yeah. Well, and then you have to, put it in some sort of comprehensible narrative. And I thought that was really interesting.
That's nice, yeah.
And then I read an alternative of that is surfers or divers, which is also really interesting, right? Surfers are sort of like, you try to cover a wide area but you can't go as deep. So you skim the surface and then you decide to dive somewhere. I don't know. I like those analogies for understanding, and I think I also like to think that I'm doing a little bit of both. I do like dive and split, but I think it is in order to say something about now.
Okay.
Like the questions that are emerging at that time on a human level.
So you dive and you pull up the treasures and then surf across to the next island to deliver the news.
Yes, exactly.
It's a nice analogy.
Ding, 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 ding. Oh, that would be so funny.
But I was told as well when I was at university that an inch deep and a mile wide. I should say it the other way around. An inch wide and a mile deep is better. Better, but that's probably actually wrong, isn't it? Better is the wrong word, but it's maybe perhaps richer research if you do that very specific thing.
That's what I tend to say to definitely students who are making grad projects, because it is way more, at least for me, it's way more creatively fulfilling to become the mini specialist in something smaller but that you know a lot about than maybe a little about a lot. I don't know. I think there's room for all of those things. It's just that you tend to have a preference.
Mm.
Oh, But
I s-
it's so interesting when you delve into these people's lives, because at some point, I mean, I think I was trying to understand who Ainsworth Rand Spofford is, and you think you have it all figured out, but that's of course impossible. So then you read something else and you go like, well, actually, in a way, I have been looking at more documentation where I go like, wow, that's out of character, and then I
Mm,
discuss that with other people who are specialists in the field, and then you go like, yeah, that would be out of character, and so it's
mm,
because then you try to look at the processes that they were involved in, like how out of character would something be, and this is sort of what we were talking about earlier, right? So if 100 years from now something would um I don't even know if this is gonna work, what I try to say. So no, I said like I have this impression that you were always like balanced and fun and happy.
yeah.
But if then something would
Someone
hinge
uncovers the
on
truth.
yes. No, but you see, so I think that you could say like, oh, something would be really out of character for you. Right, 100 years from now, someone's trying to tell a story that Tom threw the furniture around because he was so
Only
angry.
once. That was only once.
Right? No, you know what I mean. And then
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
if you would
I mean,
delve into
I've
your
definitely had my
life,
moments.
yeah,
Yeah.
not around here though, right?
But everyone's very nuanced, aren't they? Everyone's, there's always more to
For
people
sure.
than what meets the eye.
But I also think that that's so interesting about doing history, because I'm convinced that this is how I looked at the archive in my PhD. Um, these things aren't, God given, including intellectual property law, archiving. These are all processes that are based on decisions, and people people interpret those decisions, and
Humans.
they make those decisions, and they
Mm.
sometimes break with their with their processes. It's
Would you say in some way then all research is about humans?
well, all of it. Yeah, maybe.
There was a
No,
quote.
but I can imagine that there's research that is not, but yeah.
Talking about what you were just saying, I wrote down the final sentence of your essay. Is it called an essay? Is that right to call it an essay
I
in
would
this,
call
or
that an
yeah,
essay,
an essay?
yeah.
It makes me happy, very happy,
Mm.
to think that you and I are tiny spots in each other's histories. With gratitude, Claudy.
Mm.
I thought that was lovely sign off.
Mm.
And I was going to sort of ask you, but you've almost already delved into it yourself. But do you find yourself in a relationship with these characters from years
Yeah,
ago?
very much so. I remember I had several addresses when I was in DC during the fellowship, and there would be moments where I remember particularly it was a cold morning, and I was walking to the library, but you walk by the backside of the U.S. Supreme Court, which is next door, and then you see. I mean, it's magical. That kind of weather. You have that blue winter sky, and the sort of the cherry blossoms that are coming out, that pink, and then that white marble, and those three colors together are just so stunningly visual. Um, and then you're standing there and you go like, but these buildings are old enough for this person to have seen it,
Mm.
right? And then you start wondering, so where did he live? How did he come to the library in the morning? And then there are little, and then you go down rabbit holes, and then that information is findable, right? There are postcards that he sent home in which he like describes his life, or the hotel where he was staying, or that where he lived, it took him about an hour to walk. Sometimes he would take his horse, and actually he wasn't necessarily at the Library of Congress, because at that time the library was still in the Capitol, but which is across the street, and then he would tie his horse to the. I mean, those. Just imagining what someone's life was like, and this was just someone going about their day,
Mm.
but it happened to involve these decisions that have repercussions for us. So this is how I started seeing it, as these long lines of, we are connected, right?
That's a fascinating thought.
And he doesn't realize that, about me. But this is also
Maybe in a parallel universe, he knows you exist, and he's studying you at the end of your life.
Oh my god! Can you imagine making a movie about that? But there's something really. So a former colleague of mine at the Netherlands Film Museum described this really, really beautifully in an essay that he wrote, because you're sitting at a Steenbeck table, right? A table through which you roll the film, and you go backwards and forwards, and there are so many people populating these films, particularly the non-fiction ones. And because usually in the early nonfiction work, they stare directly into the camera, and you have this moment with a person where you go like, that person is staring right at me, but you know that they're not there anymore, and that is a crazy experience. Because also over the time of working on a title and restoring it, you kind of have the feeling that you get to know them, or you project all these things onto their lives. And
I think I can. Yeah, I think I've felt that same feeling you're describing before, looking at old photos, and especially it seems more so with children from years ago. For some reason, that hits me.
Yeah.
That they're now probably have grown up and died.
Yeah.
And you think, I don't know. I wonder if there's a term to describe that feeling.
That's a good question.
It can't be only you and I who feel that.
No. And I've seen it described. I also have it with pets in pictures, like dogs running around
who no longer exist, and it feels like a part of their soul is captured in that photo.
Yeah, but particularly and lots in those early copyright deposits, is people staring at the camera. And you have the feeling that you're looking into their world, but in a weird way, they're looking back out at you.
Oh.
No, I find that, but that's the connection. That's the story, right? That's a narrative that you make up. But this is how, and so you start imagining their dailiness, and that to me is the beauty of doing that research, not necessarily in righting the wrongs. I mean, I have no control over what anybody thinks about anything, but I am looking for that connection. I think that's why it's fascinating to me. And I have the feeling in a weird way that Ainsworth Rand Spofford and I are soulmates, and he doesn't know.
You're like the weird stalker looking through his window at night.
From the beyond. Yes. Oh my gosh.
So that's what kind of motivates you to continue doing this sort of work. Is that feeling? Is that the core motivation for you, or why do you do this? Why do you do this, Claudy?
Wow. Well, I think it's this is a therapy session. Why do I do this? Well, I mean, one aspect of it is just curiosity. I think I just want to follow. There's this thing that's really interesting, and I want to understand what that feeling is.
That's my motivation for a lot of things.
Yeah,
including this podcast, probably. And this conversation.
No, that is what it's a big drive, right? A big motivator. Because why do we do anything? It's because you want to know how it works. You want to know what it was like. And I think that's how it starts. So yeah, those basic questions. So for instance, if we talk about the paper print, it's just as soon as I arrived at the Library of Congress, it was very, very clear that, I mean, I've always known that, right, there was a registration that was earlier than the sneeze, but once I got inside, within the first 6 weeks or so, I wrote in my notebook, wow, this really goes hand in hand. The history of the emergence of cinema in the US, the history of intellectual property, but it's also the institutional history of the Library of Congress. And once I started realizing that there's this intersection, And that I realized, but these documents are created on the inside of this institution. So why don't we know? And that was the big question. And so my curiosity of not only the knowing, like I want to know what happened, but why don't we know? And so those two things have driven that whole journey.
Is it exciting thinking about sharing it with others as well?
Eventually, perhaps, yeah. But I've come. So this is going to be a tangent. So earlier this year, do you know Rick Rubin, the music
producer? Yeah.
So he wrote this book called The Creative Act, which I think has changed my life.
Benji told me that you recommended it to him.
Oh my god, that's so funny. Yeah, because I've been professing this to everybody who wants to listen. And he actually is reading it in one of his films. I've read it twice, and I think it's the most profound thing I've ever read. It's it is deceptively simple. The way you read it, it's very short essays, and you fly through it like nobody's business, and then the profoundness of it hits you. And also he has a zen-like voice, so I've been listening to lots of podcasts, also really amazing interviewers, and they draw this interesting stuff out of him. But so sorry to come back to your question, is what he says in about the way he creates music is that it is only about you and your self-expression. And then once you decide that that is done, you can put it out into the world. You don't have to. But then the journey, right, is out of your hand, and you can't anticipate success. I mean, this is the famous thing in film as well, right? You don't know what's going to work. So you cannot put that success or the way that you think you're going to share something or what that is going to do at the beginning of the journey and then say, this is going to be my driver. The driver has to be your self-expression. And so that is a new concept to me. So to go from outside validation to inside, and it has changed everything for me. Like
I think that is a massive distinction between being an artist and working in a creative industry.
Yes.
Is that it goes the other way around in the industry. In the industry, they ask you, what is your target audience before you do anything? They ask you, who is your target audience? And it always bugged me.
Yeah.
It felt very creatively inhibitive.
Yeah.
Is that the right phrase?
Sure.
Yeah. And I think I'm probably more artistic than I ever really was allowed to be.
I didn't realize that being an academic afforded me to be an artist, so to speak, in that environment, because
you're not the first person to say that it's a creative endeavor. Research,
but it's relatively new to me, the fullness of that realization, where I'm like, I have found a home here that I really love. And of course, I mean, some things don't work, but I think that's the same wherever you work. But the freedom that it affords me to do these kinds of journeys, yes, of course, there's boxes that I need to tick, or that, the institution would like me to tick. But, so for instance, take the ref, right? Like you're
going to have to explain that if we're talking about it.
Yeah, so the research excellence frame, this is how the research money gets divided on a national level. The next round is going to be in 5 years. So the tension is already building of, we need to create referable outputs. So, to me, there is no way of putting that end goal of something has to be whatever 4 stars at the beginning of something. So the way that I'm trying to apply what I just said to what I'm trying to do is, I'm going to write the most creative, best thing that I know, right, that I can do.
And you're going to trust your instincts in that process.
And then if it becomes referable, I mean, this might not be how other academics work.
But I think that's the problem. I think I've heard some podcasts with Ruben as well, and that he says he keeps the execs away from the artists as much as possible because they have those two different approaches.
Right, exactly.
And it ruins the artists. And I think maybe just coming back to the thing about Star Wars that I said, these big franchise blockbuster things, I think that's probably it.
That's exactly right.
It feels soulless because
that's exactly right.
They've discussed and strategized beforehand how they're going to make money out of this, what's the target audience, all that stuff.
Yeah, and that idea of the existing IP will pay off a second time because we've created the audience and they're coming back for more.
Yes.
Which is, of course, partially true.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily something I'm interested in. And I think I might have been more black and white before, where I would actually turn it down. Now I'm like, there's room for all of us. Well, this has gone in a different direction.
I love it.
But it's that book has, I can't describe.
I need to read it. What's the title?
The Creative Act.
The Creative Act.
But the subtitle is A Way of Being. So although there are some examples in it that are about music, but it's mostly sort of stripped from that language, and it's actually quite general to apply. But there are things in there that I've immediately used with students. So there's a list in there of where he says the following things are not conducive to making the work, and whether that is actually creating an output or being in a healthy relationship, or it is really a way of being. So there are things in there that immediately hit home. So for instance, before you start a project or relationship or whatever, you set the bar so high that it actually stifles you to start. Now that is a concept that everybody can recognize, no matter how you apply it. There's another one that says everything that is not in your control cannot be in your way. And so all of these things are retro-engineerable for my students, because at the beginning of L6, when they're starting to think about their grad projects, I hear versions of these stories like all the time. This is what they do. Oh, because I cannot make the great, feature film that I've always wanted to make, and I want to get into Sundance with it, but that's not going to happen. So I'm going. Do you see what I mean? So it's just like that untenable thing that the outside validation like stops them from even starting. The joy of experimentation is gone, and that's what I try to strip out of their stories. And I'm not saying it's always successful, but and then these things that you can't control, oh my god, it's the biggest lesson in life. Like, can I control it? Can I not? Then if I can't, then
no use worrying about it.
Let it go. But my gosh,
I think this is probably why you're such an inspirational teacher for your students. That reminded me of a podcast I was listening to the other day. I can never remember the people I'm about to quote. Neil Gershenfeld, I think his name was. He works in maybe robotics or something like this. He said that you can think of working on creative pursuits as ready. People say you should ready, aim, fire in the process. You should ready yourself, prepare, aim for something and then fire. But he says instead he does ready, fire, aim.
Oh, I like that.
Which is kind of I've in retrospect I've been reflecting on that. It's sort of what I'm doing with this podcast. I started and even from the first episode to this episode, things have changed.
Yeah.
So I'm literally modifying it as I go along, rather than stressing about how good I've got a big long list of about 20 things that could improve this podcast. But now is not the time. It's not ready yet. Like I want hopefully one day to use multiple cameras, for example. But if I did that right now, it would cause me no end of extra editing work and stress. Yeah. So to the point where I probably wouldn't then do the podcast because it would be too much. Yeah. So it's that sort of idea. You ready, fire, and then you sit down and think about what you've got and where we can go from here, kind of thing.
And that is the creative method, right? You try, and then you reassess.
Reiterate.
And then you go like, what would I do differently? So I love that about what we do in L4 with understanding experimental film, because that's exactly what we try to teach them. But the funny thing is, these students are so conditioned to have this one slick final submission that they honestly don't know what it is to experiment, which is exactly what we're asking them to do. And then at the same time, what we're also asking is, you owe it to yourself to figure out whether this is the way that you like working, because if it is not, it'll show you, super invaluable lessons for the rest of your career. If you are not a self-starter, if you don't have an idea and you want to get up and you want to work on it, that probably determines what you're going to do in a film crew, right? If you always like being surrounded by other people, if you like being on a set, and conversely, there are people who discover, well, this is exactly how I like working. That might, right, make you gravitate towards certain roles over others. And it's, sometimes really shocking that, some of them really embrace this. And especially, L4 is really important.
So this is first year of undergrad?
Yes.
L4, yeah.
So it's really important because they, are in a new environment, they need to pass it. But the first year doesn't count towards the classification of their degree.
Yeah, but that's problematic in itself, isn't it? And I've always felt this when I'm marking. The concept of marking a film at all is massively problematic in my mind.
How come?
Because if we are saying that film is art, then how can you grade art? I guess we have assignment criteria, right? So we mark against the criteria.
Yeah.
But I hope it doesn't give students the wrong impression that they're being marked as if it's some judgment of their film in total, because it's only literally an assessment of the assessment criteria.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. But also, there are other things that you use, right? So for instance, there's in understanding experimental film, they make an artifact, and we call it artifact for a reason, because it can be something else that is not a film. But there's also a logbook in which they lay out their process. This is also really what I love about our program, is that it's this constant integration of the practical and the theoretical, right? And the making and the writing. But it's also, we see that particularly in the grad project, we have intended learning outcomes, and whether someone is making an exhibition of film or writing a dissertation, they have to adhere to those learning outcomes. And at the same time, it is the design of a research project, which starts with a robust research question, a methodology, and then hopefully a conclusion and a jumping off point to a future endeavor. And irrespective of what you make, it still needs to be, right, a research project. And in practice for us, it turns out that the people who make films have a much harder time designing it as a research project, because they are so caught up in the, right, all the elements that go into making a film, that they kind of forgot that it is underpinned by a research question. And then it's really, those conversations are so fascinating, because they might look at someone like Christopher Nolan and think, oh, he's only involved with whatever, his 70mm camera, but they kind of forget that even big productions like that, there's usually some research questions underpinning.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
The whole lot. It's not just like, because I hear this all the time, but I just want to make things. It's so fascinating.
Is that not contradictory to what we said a moment ago about being creative and experimenting, though, or do you think that's for outside of the assessment briefs?
I know, but that's all one big process. you have a question, no matter what the research question is, and then you go about the process of experimenting, but then you need to build in a check moment of what do I think constitutes success in light of that research question. And then you reassess, you adapt, you experiment some more, and then you end up at a final answer to that research question, or you might decide
Which might
that
also
was-
be part of an experiment in your broader life or the broader degree, perhaps, that
Yeah.
individual assessment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I think
No,
it's
but
important for students to keep that perspective when they
Yes.
get a grade back, that this could just be a stepping stone to figuring something else out. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
I think it might be something else Rick Rubin said, actually, since you brought him up, that artists need to have space to fail and to throw out their worst work
Yeah.
and feel comfortable to be able to put ideas out there that are
But I mean,
terrible at times.
Look at your own life. I mean, aren't the biggest lessons in the things that did not work? I mean, for me,
The hardest lessons often.
yeah, for sure, but the ones that will stay with you forever. And of course, there are wonderful highlights, and you learn from that too. Maybe that they can exist, but my low points have taught me more than, or failures in that sense, that maybe things that you would never do again, or that you've taught you such a, I mean, some experiences in life are a true paradigm shift in the way that you are in the world, right?
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
yeah, the room to fail is, but that's also here. It's a very, very expensive playground.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. I wonder if that changes the dynamic of that.
Yeah.
Anyway, right, I've been meaning to talk about your book, and I
Yeah.
can't believe we've left it this long. So, Claudy,
Yeah.
Kamp, Dr. Claudy Kamp. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Yeah, good. Put this book together. Is that fair to say?
You know, co-edited. Yes.
Co-edited. A History of Intellectual Property in 50 Objects.
Yes.
Which I grabbed from our library. So if anyone, students or staff from Bournemouth University are listening, you can get that from the library.
And at the end of L5, we do a quiz, and whoever wins gets a copy.
Do they really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely.
It's really fun.
Do they go, oh, thanks? No,
No,
I'm joking. I'm
no.
joking.
I mean, usually, yeah, no, usually they, they love it.
It's a fantastic idea and a fantastic book. How did it come about? And also the burning question I want to really ask is, how on earth do you go about getting together? How many contributors are in this?
50.
50 individual contributors.
Yeah.
One for each chapter,
Yeah.
essentially. One for each essay.
A couple are double and a couple have two. So in the end, I think it is exactly 50.
Yeah, I noticed some have double, which is why I wasn't sure. But how do you go about getting all those people to write this thing for you? And do you know them all personally? Are they all contacts of yours? Were they contacts before this, or did you just start the process of finding these people? How on earth do you go about doing that?
We can do an entire podcast on this book. So
Feel free to refer to it if you need to.
Yes. So I responded to a job ad. That's how it starts.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
And it was at Swinburne University in Melbourne. I had just finished my PhD. I really wanted to continue on this. I mean, I was so interested in copyright and intellectual property, and I saw this ad, and it said it was the most wonderful thing that I had read, because it was a postdoctoral fellowship in intellectual property, but who they were looking for, the way that was written was really inviting, because it even said, like, you could be coming from game studies, and I was like, the person who has written this has a particular way of inviting in the openness of bringing in other perspectives. So that was Dan Hunter, my co-editor, and I had
So Dan came from Dan. Oh, I see. Dan was the one who put the ad out.
Yes,
I see.
And he's the foundation dean of the law program at Swinburne University.
Okay.
So I had a conversation with him just before I actually put in the application, and this is what he mentioned. He had this idea. It had sort of stagnated for a number of reasons, but whoever he was going to hire was going to work on this book. And that was, I mean, my light bulb. I was like, that has to be me. No, because I just, you know what, the way he explained it to me in this conversation, I remember this really vividly, and I still have, you know, I was scribbling down all these notes while we were having this conversation, and I saw it in my head. Like, he named the title, and I saw it in my head. I was like, this is something I would want to work on. This is a very long process. I mean, this is from that moment until I came out, it was about 4 years, I'm going to say, yeah.
No, still, that seems actually surprisingly short.
Actually, yeah, I mean, because from the actual book proposal or the contract until finishing was actually, no, I mean, we worked pretty hard. But also my role changed over time, and it became larger and larger. So there are so many answers to all those questions that you asked. So Dan obviously has, you know, the majority of these contacts, some of whom are very clearly mine. Then we start, I mean, it's just one big puzzle, right? So, no, I mean,
it feels like it's paining you just to think about this.
No, but it's no. Well, no, there's just not one answer to the question, because it changed like almost on a monthly basis, because let's look at, so there's all these different regimes within intellectual property, but we also say it's a history of intellectual property. So there is patents, there are trademarks, there is copyright, and we needed to, were we going to do this chronologically, and what are the objects that are going to be in this book, and who's going to write it, and some of the people we didn't know, and we just contacted them. But what I do want to say is, and I think that was a really good way forward. I had created a dummy for just about half of the book of 25 objects, of sort of thinking through some of these issues, because I can give you an example. So this material at the beginning of every chapter, in which we say what is the bigger color code that it's part of, because these color codes are periods so
of time, speak. Right?
And then what regime is it patent? What country? What is the timing? So making this visual sort of helped us think through some of the issues that we were going to have to address, and how were people going to use this book.
And again, you're sort of looking for milestones, I suppose. Are you like things that have shifted the interpretation of the laws and things like this?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, but also they just needed to be really good stories. They needed to be interesting objects. They needed to be objects of which, you know, if you're interested in this book, you go like, I had no idea that this Singer sewing machine that my mother has in the shed.
Well, I can give one example that really surprised me. It was Mike Tyson's tattoo towards the end of the book.
Yeah.
I mean,
I love that.
Well, I haven't read that particular essay yet, but I mean, the questions that popped into my mind is, who owns the copyright for that?
That's exactly right.
Is it a spoiler alert? We don't want to give away anything.
No. I mean, I also don't necessarily want to thread on, you know, what the individual authors write, because this is also, you know, these are particularly personal interpretations of some of these really difficult questions. But there is, of course, as you might realize, the movie of the Hangover that then uses it, and that became a very famous court case of that to two artists.
Because another actor had it tattooed on their face.
Yes,
is what you mean, in the thing. Yeah, right.
And then this is sort of a combination of two different styles, but it's also traditional knowledge. I mean, the story is incredible. Like,
I need to read that one later.
Yes.
I read the Barbie one in full because I heard you mention that on another podcast, and I thought, okay, I'll have to read that one. And that's really interesting. I love the kind of the way it was told, as if it's a struggle over Barbie being used as a sex symbol, and they were basically trying to protect this over time.
The chaste image, yeah.
But then they were always kind of trying to figure out where on the line they should fall between kind of, you know, enforcing all this stuff, but also letting people have creative freedom to allow Barbie to become this other thing in the public sphere, sort of thing. And it mentioned, you know, that Aqua song Barbie Girl in it, and and that kind of interpretation of it. And I think they took out a couple of lawsuits, didn't they? I think one was against that that band, but they were unsuccessful on both of the major ones.
The whole chapter is about that particular litigation strategy, because I think, you know, Barbie, in a book like this, you could have told 5 different stories, and this is one particular one. So that is part of, you know, so for instance, Dan's research was very much about Mattel and Lego, but also into luxury items. And so that sort of started to shape. That was the very first chapter that was done.
Oh, really?
And also that particular style in which he wrote it, that was sort of the driver for Cambridge University Press to go like, oh, I think there's a book here, right? Because it was, we have called it sort of well-informed but still popular, right? It has a, I mean, it's
the subject category it belongs to, you mean, is sort of like,
yeah, like every essay
appealing to popular,
yes. Yeah. But also, you know, not a lot of footnotes, actually none, which is quite difficult to get lawyers to write without footnotes. But what I was trying to say earlier is it has remained a big puzzle until the very end. I mean, I can, for almost every entry, I can give you like 5 alternatives that we might have discussed, right? The master list is huge, but it was a lot like, oh, if that person could do this one, then maybe this other person could do that one. But if this person is either not available or they don't want to do that object, but they have a different suggestion, then maybe that. Do you see what I mean? And so we did a couple of round tables, which were really interesting. So I had a dummy for about half of the book. And then we invited in 3 different locations, sort of local people who we would know would be invested in this idea. In most cases, were even going to be part of the book. But without opening the dummy, we had it on the table. And it was more like, okay, if you see a book with this title, and it didn't have this cover yet, it actually had the Barbie's legs on the cover, which I've always loved as a cover. No, because it's so, you know, her hip joint is patented, but it's so visually stunning, and she stands on her tiptoes, which, you know, it's all protected. So anyway, that was on the table, and then we were like, okay, a book with a title like this, what would you expect to definitely be in this book? And then we started, you know, it was really sort of a workshop type environment. So the light bulb always came up. The contraceptive pill, Coca-Cola. You know, there were a couple where you're like, you have to have those. Right. And then, but we already had most of the ones that people said. I think maybe in 1 or 2 cases we changed our minds and go like, oh, that's a good one. Or we had these representative categories, I want to say, and then what we could stick in there was almost immaterial in the sense. So we had these categories of like, we need to do something with luxury, but what is going to be the actual thing that was then
because
still debatable.
Because you want people to understand this thing about,
yes,
and
exactly.
then you figure out which object best suits that.
So that happened
topic.
Quite a bit.
Yeah.
But there's lots of duos and tandems in there too. So for instance, Viagra and the pill go hand in hand. But we discussed also, for instance, what would happen if the one gets written by a woman and the other one by a man, or vice versa? Would that change the story? So we experimented quite a bit with that. I think we each put our own personalities in there in terms of what, I mean, I thought quite hard for certain media entries. I thought the Zapruder film had to be in there, you know, and that says something about my own interest. You know what I mean? So we are in this book as well. And then the main reason why this book is called A History of Intellectual Property in 50 Objects is that you can...
What we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, you can make three more of these volumes with 50 other objects, and you would ask any random professor of IP, maybe some of the objects would be the same, but it's very likely that they wouldn't have chosen these particular 50. And actually, ever since it has come out, there's always examples where I'm like, oh, that would have been good.
Well, the Eiffel Tower, I don't know when I heard that. The Eiffel Tower was patented. And I was going to ask you why wasn't the Eiffel Tower included, but I guess you don't have an answer for that.
No, I mean, there's so many objects where you go like, why was that not included? So Brian Fry, whose podcast you mentioned, but he wrote the entry for the Zapruder film. He liked the format so much that he used it as a contest for his students in the US, and he asked me to be a judge for this essay competition, and their ideas were so amazing, like the Tiffany blue box, because that blue color is protected. I mean, it was such a genius. I was like, oh man, that would have been a great one. The Air Jordan, and now with the film coming out, because I watched it and I was like, oh man,
that's a big
really,
one
really
actually.
good.
Yeah.
The thing is also, don't forget that most of these objects have lots of other objects have IP stories, but these IP stories usually have a twist to it. So we can think of many other objects that are
iconic,
copyrighted, patented, whatever. But
what's their story?
Exactly, and sometimes there is no issue, but Barbie is particularly juicy, right? Coca-Cola is particularly juicy, and so you can tell many more volumes like that. So that's why it's not called The History of Intellectual Property. No, we were very, very...
Maybe the next one will have to be The History in 30,000 objects.
Oh my God. But the funny thing is, it plays on a trope, and you can find many more like this. And some actually say the. And then because I looked at, I don't know how many of these, like a lot, and I read the introductions to all of them because I was wondering what they would be flagging up. But that idea of, have we set ourselves up for a mission impossible, is almost in all of them. Because what you're trying to do is, again, you try to package 300 years of history into...
It could be a sense of arrogant slightly to say the as well. I mean, I actually undernerd.
Also, I don't think it's possible. You can't say this is the history of IP.
Yeah, but in terms of marketing, I think it doesn't matter either way. But because I undernerd for this podcast, it's called An Idiot's Guide to Academic Route rather than the.
Yes.
But ultimately, I wonder if the would be better because it jumps out at people. Oh, that's the one. That's that.
But that's also the book series of The Idiot's Guide to.
Yeah. Oh, true. So I could be in a spot of bother if I'd use that.
Oh no, that's not what I meant.
Is that what you meant?
No, but I mean it. You can then use the recognizability of that expression.
Oh, I see.
Right?
You don't think I'd get in trouble with intellectual property?
No, it doesn't work like that.
You're the person to ask.
Well, no, I also think that in art and education, everything should be allowed. So don't quote me on any of it. No, and it was
the line I'll go with.
It was just really wonderful to work on this. Some people I still haven't met. Sometimes I'm at events or conferences where I see a name like this and I have a great reason to go over, and it's just so fun to introduce yourself to someone who...
Wouldn't it be great to have an exhibition of this?
Yeah.
Has that been considered?
Well, we had an event at a conference in Rome just before it came out, where we were in the position of having 20 authors in the same spot, and then we did like a big presentation and a book launch. So that was really, really fun. But
I suppose it would be almost impossible to get all 50 together at once.
Yes, and also some of these objects are either too large or non-existent. Some are unique. So, for instance, there's a Tempesta map of Rome. There's only a few iterations of those.
Right.
I mean, yeah, it's... And it's still so interesting to see now, many years later, how people are using it, and they keep telling me stories about how they're using it, or what they would put in the book. And yeah, so it keeps growing.
It's fantastic. It's a wonderful idea. I think it also achieves something that I'm maybe slightly aiming to achieve with this podcast, which is making the kind of intangible more tangible. So I'm trying to sort of break down barriers to the idea of academic research.
Right.
You've managed to successfully kind of condense the idea of intellectual property
Right.
into something, as you
Because
say,
it's
that is.
such a scary term, right?
I mean, yeah.
people
I mean,
like,
this has opened my eyes completely to just how ubiquitous the idea of intellectual property
Yeah.
is. Oh, that's what I was going to ask you actually. How do you think life would be different today if we didn't have these laws and this system in place? How would it change the way we do things?
There's a wonderful book, those Oxford very short introduction to. So there's one for intellectual property, and it's written by I'm going to butcher his name, Siva Vaidyanathan, who's a communication scholar at, I believe, NYU, and he's written the very short introduction to intellectual property. I actually use it for teaching because it is the clearest, most accessible kind of language to lay out the relatively short history, but also the importance. And he does, the introduction is entirely hung up on the example of Starbucks, like all the regimes of the intellectual property system come together in Starbucks. And actually, maybe a Starbucks cup would have been, had I read that book first, then maybe a Starbucks cup would be in there. No, because it's so ubiquitous, and even to the design of every Starbucks, it's the trade dress and all of it. But what I'm trying to say is that he, in this book, tries to imagine the world, like, what if the protection was stronger, but what if it would not exist? And he describes it in such great ways. I wouldn't even be able to, try to do it in my own way. But he talks about.
I wonder how it would affect the economy, for example, when businesses and corporations becoming
intellectual property underpins trillions of international trade, right? I mean, it would have a huge effect.
I mean, it'd be very confusing to know what product you're picking up for sure if everyone, because everyone would obviously just copy the biggest thing.
Right. But you're talking maybe about a book and a film, but he's talking in the book about what if you don't know whether something is going to poison you or is actually
food and drink,
or a medicine. Medicine and IP, right? It's probably one of the biggest subcategories that maybe on a daily basis we don't think about that's regulated by IP. But
I just can't imagine our sort of capitalist thing would have gone in this manner if we didn't have IP from the start. If that makes sense, I can't imagine there being big brands or anything. It's very hard to imagine, isn't it?
Yeah, and you can even say, I mean, we wouldn't have an iPhone in our pocket without IP. The internet wouldn't exist. We wouldn't have brands like Sony and, whatever. No, it underpins everything, but it plays such a big role in our daily lives, but most people don't realize that's the case, and that was the whole. That was the whole angle into the book. And I think I wasn't part of it then yet, but there's an earlier iteration of this idea where it was IP in the home. And so it was divided into maybe sort of the rooms of the house, right? Like a trip trap chair for a baby. It's all IP, and that idea then didn't sort of come to full fruition, but it sort of turned into this.
And I mean, how many IP I hope I'm using the right terminology, intellectual property patents are there that go into the iPhone, for example? Must be thousands.
Yeah, I think
small pieces
but
that
it's
at
all
some
of
point.
those regimes. It's it's copyright, it's patent, it's the design, all of it. I wouldn't even dare to put a number on it, but it's probably in the thousands. Yeah.
Fantastic. So check out Claudy's book if you're interested.
Yay.
Probably available at all good bookstores. Do we still say that these days?
I don't know.
Online,
Oh my
yeah.
God, I have actually never seen it in an actual shop. That would be fun.
We need to change that.
Yeah. No, but I mean, you can buy it from Amazon and where have you.
Other providers are available. You have some pictures, right?
Oh yeah.
Should we go for them?
Yes.
And then we'll wrap up.
Which one do you want to see first?
I don't mind. It's up to you.
Okay. Oh, the funny thing is, you asked me to bring a picture, and then I just.
Claudy didn't read the brief properly. If any students are watching,
you just said bring a picture.
I'm sure I said to blue tack on the wall.
Yeah, I mean, technically you could blue tack it, but what you meant was that you wanted to keep it.
Yes, look, yeah.
I thought temporarily for the run.
But we'll take a photo of it or something and then
Yes.
print it and put it on the wall. Wow, what is that?
So this is actually in my apartment. So I just lifted it up and brought it in the bus.
We could try blue tacking it. I think it would pull the posters down.
Yes. No, you can maybe take a picture of it.
Yeah.
So you said bring something that represents your research. And so I sort of looked over and I was like, that image does represent my research. So this is a still from an abstract animation by Len Lai, who was a New Zealand filmmaker.
Mm.
And when I first saw this film, it blew my mind. It's from a film called Swinging the Lambeth Walk. And now I'm blanking on the year, but I want to say maybe 1939. It's set to amazing music, and it's abstract animation, and this dances. I mean, it's incredible. So what Len Lai did is he took the so-called virgin celluloid and then drew on it. But as you might know, right, a 35 millimeter frame has 4 perforations and a frame line. But what he uses is a completely blank film strip, and he draws on it. But the mathematical foresight almost that he must have had to understand how this was going to move once it runs through a projector is, I mean, every time I watch it, I find it mind-blowing.
Was it running at 24 frames per second?
Yes. So it's a sound.
And it gives the impression of continuity of movement like a normal film would, right?
I mean, you should watch it. I mean, these stars and the little balls, they explode and they dance.
Really?
I mean, it's so beautiful.
And he's done that presumably. I mean, I've seen that animation method where they lay the previous frame underneath and then sort of trace slightly to one side to show movement of a character. He wasn't doing that. He was just doing it on a strip.
I think he was doing it on the strip, but it also
that's phenomenal.
I actually should have probably looked into these details, but I think it took something like 3 years to make. And at the time, the GPO in this country, they commissioned this kind of work, right? It was an ad to like post early for Christmas. They had these amazing international abstract animators and experimental filmmakers make these ads to post early. So first you see like 2-3 minutes, and that's some of his other work as well. So you see this incredibly gorgeous work, and then at the end it goes like bling bling bling. Oh, post early for Christmas. Then you realize you've been watching.
What's GPO? The post office.
Yeah, I think that's what it stands for, right?
Oh, I don't know.
GPO?
I've never heard of the GP. The G bit. PO, I guess, is post office.
Yeah, but I think it was at the time of the mail. Oh, I'm blanking on the acronym, but yeah, let's look it up. But it was something with the.
It doesn't matter.
No, but it kind of does.
So it's an advert for the post office, the sort of Royal Mail of the time or whatever it was.
Commissioned, and here are these masterminds, making this incredible material. But anyway, this irrespective of this one, I think wasn't for the posting early. It doesn't matter. The film is gorgeous, and I saw it on a big screen. But what it represents for me is not only the handicraft of how, the dailiness of working on this thing for 3 years and then seeing it move, but it represents sort of the incredibly privileged world on the inside of the archive. Because when I was at the Netherlands Film Museum, this is actually a still from the print that they had. Because I had a colleague who whose job was alongside other things that he did, but he would make stills for the sales department because these would be used for sales, but also, you know, if you write a book and you need stills in the old days, so to speak, you would have to ask like whether they could make a still for you for your book, right? So that was a service that was provided, but it took like lots of steps, and this is an actual slide, right? A 35 millimeter slide. He had like this particular setup with which he made slides from these films. But what was so incredible about working there is that I had this opportunity of looking at this print and looking at how it was made. And I think what it represents for me now is not only do I think this is a gorgeous still and the colors and all of that, but it's, I think all my research deals with not only that creative reuse of existing material, but also the discrepancies between that privileged inside of the archive and then being outside of it, and then looking at factors that influence access to archival collections, and realizing that on the outside we only see a very, very small percentage of what's inside an archive, and whether that's film or you know, Library of Congress. So that to me, I mean, I might be reading more into it than it actually.
Well, I was just thinking it's fascinating that an abstract image can mean so much to an individual, I suppose.
Yeah.
And it's down to the individual to have that. But that's amazing that
well,
it does that. It evokes all of those thoughts and feelings for you.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, I thought it was a beautiful film. Now you can just click on YouTube and find it and watch it. But 25 years ago, that definitely wasn't the case. And so there is a real distinction between what you can do on the inside of an archive when you have all this beautiful material at your disposal versus outside. And that represents for me, you know, found footage filmmaking through the use of an archive, which is very different from when you try to do that outside of an archive. So that's when copyright exceptions come into the story, which is what we try to teach our second year students. But also a huge barrier between the archive and the outside world is copyright. And so, yeah, that inside versus outside is very much, and you know, what are the stories that you can tell? What are the stories that you are allowed to tell? It's all that bigger. I think those are all my themes, and yeah.
This seems to tie them all together.
I think so. Also, I'm a ultra minimalist, so this is about the only thing I have in my house. So
well,
I was like, I'll take this one.
Thanks for bringing it in. And you're gonna have a gap on your wall now when since you're leaving this with me. No, I'm joking.
Exactly.
You have another image, right?
Yeah, this is funny. So I've been in touch with the lovely Frank, who has retired from the U.S. Copyright Office a long time ago, but who was so instrumental in my research. And he had, do you know what stereo photographs are? So it's one card that's about this big, and it has two square photographs, but the same ones, practically the same ones, but you put this into a device, which is about this far from your nose, and you look through two little lenses almost, and you see then in stereo. That was like a typical...
So like a three-dimensional effect.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's almost, I mean, that was an entertainment form at the beginning of the previous century.
Really? But that's still I mean, this VR tech is sort of doing that thing now, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
With these goggles you wear and stuff.
Nothing is ever new. Yeah. No.
How long ago was that then? That was the thing.
This is about 18. We have
18.
Yeah,
Something?
we have
Wow.
examples from 1860, 1870.
Wow.
So you've seen the shadow line, right?
Yeah.
So there's lots of stereo photographs in that.
Right,
so
yeah.
you see the colored sort of boundary, and then there's two pictures, and then they're the same. But I decided to use so many things of the Library of Congress. So there's lots of stereo photographs in the film, not being used in the way that you would use a card, but the way they are flat.
Are they captured with cameras side by side?
I think they're captured maybe what is it 10%? Your eyes
I don't know,
diverge
actually.
10%.
Okay.
So if you take
10% at that distance or whatever. I guess it's a distance thing as well.
yeah, there was I think the focal length, and
Mm.
then if you take it 10% different, then you have the perfect alignment with something like that.
So it's something that's done in post essentially to make that 10%, or
I am not
rather than
entirely
captured.
sure. Maybe it is actually two slightly different photographs.
Mm. I
I'm
don't know. I
sure
don't even
we
know
can
how they
look
do
that
that
up.
today, to be honest, with VR headsets. Whether they have two cameras side by
I
side
think
or.
sometimes it is actually two sources. Sometimes it's one source.
All right, okay.
I think we have both of those examples. I might be wrong.
Anyway, your photo.
So
What is
anyway,
this?
so he bought from an auction or either on eBay or something. He bought these stereo photographs from when the Library of Congress was still in the Capitol, and I think this is his neighbor taking a photograph of one of those photographs in the stereo. But what you see here is Ainsworth Rance Bufford behind his desk in the Capitol as a young man. So do you see him in the back?
Mm.
He has like the slick hair. But what's...
So this is the man you've been stalking all this time.
Yes, exactly.
Don't know if the camera will pick that up.
But what I use those kind of photographs
amazing.
for? So when I was at the Kluge...
Books stacked up in the back as well.
Yes, but I'll tell you a couple more things about this photograph. So when I was at the Kluge Center, I had a couple of these things printed out in front of me in my cubicle, because I find that staring at these photographs for a very long time, every time you see more. And not necessarily, yeah, maybe it's the details, but it's also staring at them where you go like, and I put that in the film as well. So I was reading the transcript of a congressional hearing in which he's asked to describe his day. And through something that is in the transcript, I then look over at the photograph and go like, oh my God, there are no lamps. Right? There was only daylight. So when it gets dark, they have to stop working, right? Because with those books, I'm sure they're not using candles, for instance. So the longer you look at this kind of evidence, the more you see. So what I would like to point out are two things. So there's this thing in front of him on the ground, which looks like a little cup.
Yeah, I thought it was a dog bowl or something.
No, so it's called a cuspidor.
Okay.
And this is what you used to spit in because men would chew tobacco. So that's the thing. Ugh. So to me,
there's one by this chap's chair, I think, as well.
Right. So this opens up a world of imagination for me, because maybe I'd seen it as well in another photograph, not really knowing what it is. Maybe indeed thinking it's a dog bowl. I don't know what I thought it was. But maybe, you see so many other things. And you go like, so that for me would be a point to start a story. Right? We don't do that anymore. You did that differently. We had smoking, then we banned smoking. Now we have vaping. Do you see how that immediately becomes a thread to tell a story?
Through modern people's perspective.
But also to try to understand, what would that have been like? People spitting in a public cup.
To us, it's almost unimaginable, but it must have been so normal back then that people
but also, what would that have smelled like? You go to the library, arguably, to maybe read there in silence.
And I can imagine some of the spit was sort of around the bowl.
Right. I mean, all sorts of things that this conjures up. But the other thing that Frank then pointed out to me, look at him. So what he is trying to do is he has elongated his desk on both sides to barricade anyone from coming in, and all the copyright...
It's sort of like planks of wood going across.
And so all the copyright deposits are behind him, right? So he's saying effectively, I don't want anybody to touch this stuff. I am barricading you physically from what I am doing here. And he was also very known for if someone would, because he was the Librarian of Congress, people would ask him questions all day long. So I'm assuming someone is standing at his desk and he describes this tactic for making people go away, and that's apparently by keeping your gaze down, which is what he's doing. Although he must realize that the photographer's up there, right? And then he quickly answers the question, but he said if you don't make eye contact, they'll go away quicker than, they would, because he just wanted to get on with his work. So to me, I don't know, by seeing it, I have the feeling I'm understanding him better. Like he was taking his work very seriously. And then so when I make all these other judgments about what might have happened all these years later, because the paper prints that we're talking about, that happens here, that happens in this room. They weren't in the Library of Congress yet as we now know it. They were still in the Capitol. So why this photograph is important to me is I use that to get sort of this deeper understanding or sense of the place, to imagine then everything else happening, and just seeing that kind of stuff. Like, what would it take for you to barricade your desks and then hide all the stuff behind it so that no one would be allowed in there? It's almost like the kit desk, you're not allowed behind it.
Well, there is a little bit of that.
Yeah.
I guess maybe it alludes a little bit to the working conditions, and that people, I don't know, the people who were working with couldn't be trusted not to touch it if he didn't barricade. Perhaps some of them had gone and looked at some stuff and it annoyed him, which led to him doing
taking it
that.
away, and their copyright deposits, right? So he was like, I need to, but maybe it's a backlog. Maybe it still needs to be put in the book. It could be anything. But it's just
it's fascinating
looking at this stuff. Anyway, and then someone pointed out, what about this painting? And we kind of now know where that painting is, or walking around here. What would it have sounded like? What did it smell like? Anyway.
So much richness in there.
Yeah, but I mean, it helps with imagining that kind of dailiness, because like we said earlier, we say a little too easily Thomas Edison invented motion pictures, right? And that's, of course, that needs unpacking in all sorts of directions. And this is a way to help imagining, I don't know, these kind of power structures, I think. And it's helpful to me.
It's fantastic. Thank you for bringing them in.
Yeah.
I guess I can't put that one on the wall either.
Huh?
I guess I can't put that one on the wall either.
No, let's take pictures of them.
I'll have to take photos of them both. I'll do that afterwards.
Yeah, no, I need my Spofford on the wall. I need to look at him some more.
Should we wrap this up?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you know, history was probably my worst subject at school behind Latin. I went to a grammar school, so we did Latin at school, and I was terrible at both of them.
I did neither.
But somehow you make history seem really interesting for me.
Oh, that's so fun.
And rich and characterful, and it makes me perhaps reconsider myself as hating history.
Full of people. Yeah, but you know what? I think there's also, we've changed so many things about how we learn things, right? Because I remember the few years that I did take history, it was a matter of, you had to learn all
dates
these
and
things
facts.
very hard. I mean,
yeah.
I
think that's what turned me away. I think it needs to be full of characters. It needs to be about the stories of the people, I think, to engage.
Of course.
Engage students, probably,
also,
from my perspective anyway.
I think we need to focus on what does that mean for you here and now? That's what history is about, right? It's always told through the vantage point of the present.
Right.
And I think
that's again something else I hadn't considered until this conversation, to be honest. So thank you for that as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's the biggest thing. My PhD supervisor, I think said this on a daily basis, and it's so incredibly powerful, because I think I've thoroughly been schooled as this is what happened, and then you realize, well, it's the storytelling of that story that we need to not necessarily mistrust, but think about question and think about a little bit more than Yeah, just assuming that is what happened.
I think that's a lovely note to leave it on. Dr. Claudy Kamp, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much.
And yeah, good luck with all your future endeavours.
Thanks. You too.
Thanks. Have we finished now?
Bye.